Okay, please welcome the behavioral genetics group.
Behavioral genetics is the field of study that examines the role in genes in human and animal behavior. This includes studying eating and mating activities, substance abuse, social attitudes, mental abilities, and today we'll be talking about the violence and criminal activities. This study brings out a controversial topic called the nature versus nurture debate. This is a debate between scientists and psychologists whether it's nature, your genes, or nurture, the way you're brought up, that determines your behavior. This first started with Gregor Mendel, known as the father of genetics, who studied pea plants. His cousin Sir Francis Galton was the first behavioral geneticist, and he studied twins in the English upper class. In the early 1970s, Lee Ehrman studied the forage and mating behavior in fruit flies. In the 1920s, the first behavioral genetic research on intelligence and mental illness began. It wasn't until the 1970s and the 1980s when there was a balanced view between the nature versus nurture debate. This also brings up epigenetics, which is a study of chemical reactions and factors that turn on and off genes. Epigenetics studies the epigenetic tags and marks which can change your DNA and make you who you are and what you act like. Today, our group will be talking about the effect nature has on violent behaviors.
Recently, scientists have been focusing on nature's side of behavioral genetics, not nurture. This is because it is more coherent to develop a medication that'll help solve issues that are hereditary or caused by genes. These studies include research on twins and violence. Over the past 5 years, there has been a study on an antidepressant called Keratin. Keratin is used for twin studies and for studying violence and rage. This drug targets deep in the right hemisphere of the brain, which is responsible for increased motion and anticipation for pleasurable activities. This drug stimulates this part of the brain, causing a decrease in depression and violence. These results support that nature plays a large role in human behavior. And as exemplified in twin studies, the results support nature theory. This is because even though the twins grew up in two completely different locations, they appear to have similar behaviors. Another study is on how genes affect violence and rage. These studies support that adopted people who grow up in a positive environment may still act out violently because their biological parents were involved in criminal activities. This means that violence and rage is inherited. Our organization is hoping to develop a medication that will help control violence and rage. There are a few concerns regarding our topic. The development of medication is costly and complex. To be scientifically valid, there has to be enough time to complete multiple trials and view and observe side effects. If our study is successful, the research will lead to the development of a medication that will help people control their rage, and this will lead to a decrease in criminal activity.
Many violent behaviors and antisocial personalities are caused by the lack of monoamine oxidase A in the human brain. It's also known as MAOA. MAOA regulates the metabolism of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine in the brain. 30% of Caucasian males lack the proper amounts of MAOA, and this has shown a correspondence with them being violent or acting on impulse. Last year alone in the United States, 1,146,163 violent crimes were committed, This does not take into account that 50% of violent crimes committed in the United States are not even reported to law enforcement. If parents that neglect to recognize their children have violent or antisocial behaviors would start recognizing these problems and realize that their children have low levels of serotonin, then we could create injections of MAOA to put into people that would regulate these amounts properly. By doing this, we'd lower the violence and crime rates within the United States. The picture on the left shows that male gang members who do not have the proper amounts of MAOA are more likely to use weapons or carry arms around. And the picture on the right shows that with maltreatment in childhood years, people who do not have the proper amounts of MAOA are likely to end up being violent or antisocial.
Many criminals are diagnosed with low MAOA levels. With low MAOA levels, one of our goals is to decrease violence. So this means that we have to increase the MAOA levels in these people with anger issues and prior cases of violence. This is an important action because violence is very prominent in our society. With this treatment, though, the prison population will decrease and violence itself will decrease. The treatment will take about 35 years for experimentation and research. The first 2 years are to test individuals for the decreased MAOA levels. The next 10 years will be experimentation on animals such as monkeys. The next 7 years on humans. Throughout this whole trial period, they will be monitored for side effects. 20 years after the treatment is allowed in the public with the doctor's recommendation, there will be a decrease in prison population from the current 2.2 million people to 1 million people. The treatment itself will first start out with a blood test, given to make sure that the person has decreased levels of MAOA. Once this is confirmed, they will be given the treatment, which consists of 3 injections over a 1-month period of time. Once they finish the treatment, they will be given another blood test to make sure they have the proper amounts of this MAOA. After this, they will only come in for an annual checkup to make sure they are still in good health. With this treatment, there will be less violence nationwide.
In order to fulfill our goal of producing a drug by the year 2040, we will need a generous amount of money and time. The majority of this money will be directed towards the workforce, who will be working on and off for the 25 years that it takes to complete the drug. The researchers are going to be working with precise instruments and powerful computers to complete their studies. The instruments will need to be modern enough to be integrated into a laboratory information management system. And to house this setup, we'll need a laboratory. The $1 million allocated to the laboratory includes renovations. Once we approach the end of our procedure, we will have a growing need to build a factory to manufacture the drugs. This will need to happen on a small scale to accommodate the human and animal trials. And the human trials will cost more than the animal trials because the humans will be paid and tests will need to be done regularly on them. To conclude our study, we will have a social media consultant spread awareness to those in need of the drug. Since the cost of this is so high, $47.05 million, we will need external funding to support it. With this grant, we'll be able to set up our laboratory information management system and purchase our social media consultant. We will search for external funding from the government and Gates and Spencer Foundation as well.
The nature versus nurture debate has always been talked about in current events, and although it has been debated, it's been concluded that the nature and the nurture of an organism contributes to behavior, which is now being discussed more in depth. Behavioral genetics is a widely discussed topic in today's news. It has been proven to provide information about how an organism's genome works and how it can be understood. Since behavioral genetics is a recent topic of controversy, it could use more funding for research, and the funds would not only go towards the research, but also to inject the monoamine oxidase A hormone into humans to reduce crime rates in the United States and other parts of the world. Reducing rates of crime would benefit many American families and would create a safer and happier place to live. The research would also solve many problems in the genome and the epigenome, which would improve life in today's world.
why don't you use more money? Why don't you use more grants for money? Because I see if you in the graph you had a very small section of money earned by grants.
That section is for this grant alone, and it was under the lab materials section because we'll need to purchase the computers, and that's what this grant is kind of going to be based on, is purchasing computers to set up the laboratory information management system.
So with the monoamine oxidase injections, is that, I might have missed it, is that something that you could do? Like if you say you tested a prison population, you noticed a lot of people in jail had this lack of this proper enzyme. Is that something that can you, I don't want to say reverse effects, but can you like reverse the effects of maybe a negligent background? It's almost like reforming criminals through medication, which sounds really ethically gray, I guess. I don't know.
That's why we're going to be doing research, first of all, to see if it's even possible to do this. And then also, like, if it's ethical, we'll have time to review how we're going to do it if it is at all possible. This is all based on our research that we're going to be doing before the drug is even played.
Got it.
Anything else?